The deep void between galaxies had long been considered an impenetrable barrier by all known spacefaring civilizations. Physics itself seemed to forbid such travel. The distances too vast, the void too empty of resources, the technological requirements beyond comprehension. The Arcadian ships emerged from the darkness like impossible dreams made manifest. Not the humans as legends would later misname them, but beings who called themselves the Arcadians. They came not in world ships, but in vessels that defied conventional understanding, massive structures that appeared to fold space itself around them, sliding between the stars with an elegance that belied their planet-sized mass. Jora 10, senior astrobiologist for the Picori Science Directorate, was among the first to detect their approach. The Picori, despite their reputation as aggressive isolationists, maintained the galaxy's most advanced deep space monitoring network, a relic of their paranoia following the hegemony wars 3 centuries prior. "Director Vass," Jora said, her voice trembling slightly as she transferred the readings to the main view screen. "I believe we're detecting visitors." Director Vass's 4 eyes narrowed simultaneously, his scaled skin shifting from pale blue to a deeper indigo, a sign of intense concentration among his species. "Impossible," he muttered, but the data was irrefutable. Something massive was approaching from beyond the galactic rim, moving at speeds that should have torn any physical object apart. "Alert the Defense Ministry," he ordered after a moment's hesitation, "but classify this as a potential first contact scenario, not an immediate threat." His caution would prove both wise and tragically insufficient. The Picori High Command, however, dismissed the first contact classification immediately. Admiral Kresh, whose family lineage traced back to the bloodiest campaigns of the hegemony wars, overruled the Science Directorate. "History has taught us that unknown visitors bring only conquest," he declared to the hastily assembled War Council. "We will not repeat the mistakes of our ancestors." And so when the first Arcadian vessel crossed into Picori space 7 days later, it was greeted not with communication attempts, but with the full might of the 8th Defensive Fleet, 300 warships arranged in a perfect blockade formation. The Arcadian ship slowed, hanging in space like a small moon, made of flowing silver and midnight blue. It made no aggressive movements. It simply waited. Admiral Kresh gave the order to fire. Later analysis would reveal that the Arcadian vessel had been broadcasting on all known communication frequencies. The message, when finally translated, was simple: "We come in peace, we bring warning, we offer salvation." The Picori weapons, disruptor beams, quantum missiles, even their feared gravity lances, simply disappeared into the vessel's protective field without effect. There was no visible shield, no energy barrier. The attacks simply ceased to exist as they approached. The Arcadian response came 3 minutes later. It wasn't an attack, not really. The vessel merely continued on its predetermined course, accelerating gently, but its passage created a gravitational wake that swept through the Picori fleet, like a cosmic hand brushing away dust. Ships tumbled helplessly, their systems overloaded, crews thrown against bulkheads, or sucked out into space through sudden hull breaches. Within minutes, the pride of the Picori defense forces was reduced to scattered debris and disabled vessels. 8,000 lives lost, not through direct violence, but through the simple physics of the Arcadian ship's passage. The message that followed was broadcast openly to all systems within range. "We deeply regret the loss of life. We did not come to harm. We came to warn. We came to prepare. The alternative is extinction for all. We will teach you. We will guide you. Submit peacefully, and together we will ensure that life continues. For the greater good, we will set you truly free." Across the galaxy, the message was received with skepticism and fear. The galactic community at this time was a complex web of alliances dominated by ancient power structures. The concept of an external threat was too convenient, too perfect a justification for conquest. On Telos Prime, the capital world of the Confederation of Free Systems, Supreme Chancellor Elara Vos called an emergency session of the Galactic Congress. The Picori have always been eager to fire first and negotiate later, she said to the assembled representatives of 86 species. But we cannot ignore what has happened. These visitors, these Arcadians, possess technology beyond our understanding. Whether they come as saviors or conquerors, we must present a unified response. But unity had never been the galaxy's strong suit. The Alethi Empire, with their warrior culture and code of honor that stretched back millennia, saw only an opportunity to demonstrate their military prowess. The Drozen Collective, eternal rivals of the Picori, suggested the visitors had been justified in their response to aggression. The Oryx sovereignty, isolationist and technologically advanced, proposed building their own version of the visitors' technology rather than engaging with them at all. Vos rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar headache that came with galactic politics. This is exactly why they'll conquer us one by one, she muttered to her aide. We cannot even agree to talk to them together. The Arcadians did not wait for the galaxy to reach consensus. Their ships, now numbering 12, spread out across key systems. They avoided populated worlds initially, establishing positions near resource-rich planets and asteroid belts. They began to build automated drones, swarms of silver machines that looked almost organic in their movements, poured from the massive vessels. They descended upon uninhabited moons and planets, constructing massive facilities of unknown purpose. When local forces approached, they were not attacked, merely held at bay by invisible fields that couldn't be penetrated. For 3 standard months, the galaxy watched in confusion and growing alarm. The Arcadians continued to broadcast their message. Submit peacefully, join us, for the greater good. Then came the Alethi incident. War Prince Thorn of the Alethi, heir to the Crimson Throne, and commander of their most elite battle fleet, had grown impatient with observation. The Alethi way was direct action, not hesitation. When an Arcadian vessel established itself in orbit around Kitharin, a mineral-rich world that had long been an Alethi mining colony, Thorn saw his opportunity for glory. We will show these interlopers that not all species in the galaxy cower before advanced technology, he declared to his war council. The Alethi bow to no one. His attack was meticulously planned. Unlike the Picori's frontal assault, Thorn deployed stealth vessels carrying elite boarding parties. Their mission was to infiltrate the Arcadian ship, capture its command center, and turn the vessel's technology to Alethi advantage. None of them returned. What happened next would later be known as the Kitharin demonstration. The Arcadian ship released a single projectile, a sphere no larger than a personal transport, that descended to the surface of the mining colony. Upon impact, it released not an explosion but a cloud of microscopic machines that spread across the planet's atmosphere within hours. These machines did not kill. Instead they altered. Every Alethi on the planet, nearly 2 million colonists, underwent an involuntary transformation. Their neural pathways were reconfigured, their very thoughts reshaped. When communications were restored 3 days later, the colonists spoke with one voice, praising the wisdom and benevolence of the Arcadians. They worked with newfound efficiency, increasing mineral production tenfold. They were no longer Alethi in any meaningful sense. They had become something else, the first of what would later be called the converted. The message that accompanied this demonstration was broadcast not just to the Alethi Empire but to every corner of the galaxy. We regret this intervention. The traditional method of conquest through violence is inefficient and causes needless suffering. We have shown you a more humane alternative. Your minds can be preserved while your productivity is enhanced. Your cultures can survive in modified form. This is not our preferred path. We would rather you join us willingly, understanding the threat we all face, but we cannot allow division and conflict to weaken us when the enemy approaches. For the greater good, Choices must sometimes be removed. The galaxy erupted in panic. The Drozen mobilized their entire defense force. The Oryx sealed their borders with experimental space-time folding technology. Dozens of smaller governments pledged immediate and unconditional surrender to the Arcadians, hoping to avoid the fate of the Kitharin colonists. Chancellor Voss made one final attempt at galactic unity, calling for a coalition fleet to confront the Arcadians directly, not in battle, but as a show of combined strength that might force negotiation. "We must know their true purpose," she argued. "If there is indeed a threat coming from beyond the galaxy, we deserve proof. If they truly come as saviors, they must treat us as partners, not subjects." But it was too late for negotiation. Within weeks, Arcadian vessels were in orbit around every major homeworld in the galaxy. Their message changed subtly. "The time for discussion has passed. The enemy approaches faster than anticipated. We must prepare, submit now, and retain some measure of self-determination. Resist, and you will still serve, but without the comfort of your own will." One by one, governments capitulated. Those that didn't found their leadership suddenly changed, speaking with new conviction about the necessity of submission. The nano-machines that had transformed Kitharin had been deployed selectively across the galaxy, targeting key decision-makers and military commanders. Within a standard year, the Arcadian conversion was complete. Every inhabited world had submitted to their rule. Production facilities constructed by their drones began operating at full capacity. A galactic network of transportation and communication, based on technology previously thought impossible, connected formerly isolated regions, and the beings of the galaxy became workers in a vast machine whose purpose they could not comprehend. Vera Lehr had been a professor of comparative xenopsychology at the University of Telos before the conversion. Now she operated a material analyzer in Processing Center 117, one of thousands of facilities that had sprung up across the former Confederation. She was luckier than most. Her mind remained largely her own, a privilege granted to those whose skills might prove useful beyond simple labor. The Arcadians had determined that complete conversion was inefficient for certain roles. Creativity and problem-solving suffered when individuality was too severely suppressed. Still, she wore the neural inhibitor that all partially preserved individuals did, a small device at the base of her skull that would trigger overwhelming pain if she attempted to resist her assigned duties or access restricted thoughts. "Shipment verified," she said dully, marking the 15th consignment of processed rare metals she had analyzed that day. The work was mindless, requiring only a fraction of her mental capacity. The rest of her thoughts were allowed to wander within permitted boundaries. She often thought about the Arcadians themselves. Few had ever seen them in person. They operated through proxies, either converted individuals who served as overseers or their silver drones. Rumors described them as tall, luminous beings with too many limbs, or perhaps as pure energy contained within synthetic shells. Vera thought these descriptions fanciful. More likely they were biological entities not so different from the galaxy's known species, simply with technology advanced enough to appear godlike. Preservation specialist Lehr, the voice startled her. An overseer stood at her station, a former Telosi like herself, but fully converted, his eyes containing the telltale silver flecks that marked the heavily modified. "You will accompany me. Your expertise is required." This was unusual. Vera felt a flutter of both fear and excitement as she followed the overseer through the labyrinthine facility. Any break in routine carried risk, but also opportunity, a chance to learn something new about their conquerors. They passed through security checkpoints where drones scanned them with invisible fields. They descended in gravity tubes to levels Vera hadn't known existed beneath the processing center. Finally, they entered a chamber unlike anything she had seen since the conversion. It was a research laboratory, not the sterile, efficient spaces the Arcadians typically created, but something that reminded Vera of academic facilities, cluttered workstations, data displays showing complex analyses, and a dozen other partially preserved individuals from various species, all working with an intensity that suggested genuine engagement rather than compelled labor. At the center of the room stood something impossible. "Is that an Arcadian?" Vera whispered. The being before her defied easy description. It was roughly humanoid, but taller than any known species, perhaps 3 meters in height. Its body seemed to shift between solid and translucent states, with an internal luminosity that pulsed in complex patterns. Where a face might be, there was only a smooth surface that occasionally rippled with what might be expressions. "No," said a voice directly in Vera's mind. "I am merely an interface." The Arcadians themselves rarely interact directly with biological entities. Vera fought through her shock. "Why am I here?" "Because you understand minds," the interface said. "And we are losing them." Over the next hours, Vera learned the truth, or at least more of the truth than any non-converted being had been permitted to know since the Arcadians' arrival. The converteds were failing, particularly those who had been fully modified. Their neural patterns were degrading. They were becoming less efficient, less responsive. Some had simply ceased functioning entirely, their bodies continuing routine tasks while their minds dissolved into chaos. The Picori physiology was the first to show symptoms, the interface explained, displaying neural scans that meant little to Vera, but the pattern has now appeared in 27 species. The conversion process is not as sustainable as the Arcadians had calculated. "Why tell me this?" Vera asked. "Because the pursuers are coming," the interface said simply, "and we cannot face them with an army that is dissolving from within." The pursuers, the threat the Arcadians had warned of from the beginning, the justification for everything they had done. "You want me to believe they're real?" Vera couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. After a year of slavery justified by a convenient external threat. In response, the interface projected an image into the center of the laboratory, a vast dark shape moving through the void between galaxies. It seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it, a silhouette defined by the stars it obscured. As the image magnified, Vera could see that the shape was not a single entity but countless smaller forms clustered together, a swarm of such magnitude that it appeared solid from a distance. "This is the vanguard," the interface said. "It will reach our galaxy within 50 standard cycles." Vera stared at the image, trying to comprehend its scale. "What are they?" "We do not know their origin. We know only their nature. They consume, not merely energy or resources, but existence itself. They do not negotiate. They cannot be reasoned with. They are entropy given purpose." The laboratory fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The Arcadian mission has always been to prepare worlds for this threat, the interface continued. "In previous galaxies, we tried honesty. We explained the danger. We offered partnership. The result was always the same: panic, division, infighting. By the time the pursuers arrived, civilizations had already weakened themselves beyond the point of effective resistance. So you decided to conquer us instead," Vera said. "For our own good." "Yes." The simplicity of the answer was almost shocking. "And now you need our help because your perfect system is failing." "Correct." Vera laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Why should I help you? Why should any of us?" "Because the alternative is extinction," the interface said. "Not subjugation, not conversion. Annihilation so complete that it will be as if your species never existed at all." Over the following weeks, Vera and the team of specialists were granted unprecedented access to information about both the conversion process and the approaching threat. They learned that the Arcadians had encountered the pursuers in 17 previous galaxies. In 15 of those encounters,
The Arcadians had failed to prepare adequately, and those galaxies had been lost completely. The pursuer's advantage is numbers, explained the interface during one briefing session. They do not innovate. They do not create. They replicate and consume. Each victory increases their swarm. Each defeat merely redirects them. The team worked tirelessly to develop a modified conversion process, one that would preserve more of the individual's original personality while still ensuring compliance with the defense preparations. It was morally fraught work, and Vera often lay awake in her quarters, questioning whether she had become complicit in enslavement. "We're making more humane shackles," she argued during one particularly heated session. "Is that really our best option?" Nextor, a Drozen neurophysicist, fixed his compound eyes on her. "What would you suggest instead? Return free will to trillions of beings who now hate their conquerors, just before an existential threat arrives? That approach failed in 15 galaxies. Then what about the 2 where the Arcadians succeeded?" Vera countered. What was different there? The answer came not from her colleagues, but from the interface, which had been silently observing.
Partnership, it said. In both cases, we had sufficient time to demonstrate the threat conclusively before the pursuers arrived. We had decades, not months. We built trust. We formed genuine alliances. Then why didn't you do that here? Vera demanded. The pursuers are learning, the interface said. Their approach is accelerating. When we detected their trajectory toward this galaxy, we calculated we had 3 centuries to prepare. That projection was incorrect. At current speeds, they will arrive in 48 cycles. The revelation stunned the research team into silence. We miscalculated, the interface continued. And in our haste to compensate, we have created a different problem. The neural patterns of converted beings are deteriorating because the process lacks synergy with native thought structures. We imposed rather than integrated. It was expedient but unsustainable. Vera saw her opening. Then give us back ourselves, she said intently. Remove the neural inhibitors. Show everyone the truth about the pursuers. Let us choose to fight alongside you rather than serve you. The risk is necessary, Vera interrupted. You need minds that can innovate, adapt, find solutions you haven't considered. Drone minds can't do that. And time is running out to try anything else. The debate continued for days, moving beyond the research team to whatever passed for Arcadian leadership. Finally, a decision was reached. A new broadcast was prepared, not a command, but an explanation. The truth about the pursuers, the evidence of their approach, the admission of Arcadian miscalculation, and a proposal, a gradual release from conversion, beginning with key individuals who could help maintain order through the transition. There will be chaos, the interface warned. There will be violence directed at those seen as collaborators. Former governments will attempt to reassert control. Production will decrease temporarily. Yes, Vera agreed. But there will also be innovation, cooperation born of genuine understanding, rather than compulsion. If the threat is as real as you claim, people will come together to face it. Some will still believe it is a deception. Some always will. But enough will understand. The release, as it came to be known, began cautiously. Neural inhibitors were deactivated remotely, one population center at a time. The process was carefully monitored and supported by newly formed transition councils, mixed groups of formerly converted individuals who understood both the reality of the threat and the legitimate grievances of the liberated. As Vera had predicted, there was chaos. On some worlds, former overseers were hunted down and executed. On others, old rivalries reignited as species blamed each other for collaboration. Production facilities stood idle as workers walked away from forced labor. But there was also something unexpected: curiosity. People wanted to see the evidence for themselves. They demanded to know more about these pursuers. They asked questions about Arcadian technology, about defense plans, about what had happened in other galaxies. 6 months after the release began, Vera found herself addressing the newly reconstituted Galactic Congress. The Grand Chamber on Tellus Prime had been restored, though many of the representatives were new. Previous leaders had been among the most thoroughly converted, and many had not survived the reversal process. "We face a threat greater than our divisions," she told them, standing before the massive holographic display showing the approaching swarm. The Arcadians were wrong in their methods, but not in their warning. "We have 47 cycles to prepare for an enemy that has consumed 15 galaxies before ours. Why should we believe anything associated with the Arcadians?" demanded a representative from one of the Outer Rim territories. "They enslaved us, they violated our minds. This could be yet another deception." Vera nodded. "Your skepticism is reasonable, which is why the Arcadians have agreed to withdraw their direct presence from all inhabited worlds. Their ships will relocate to the Galactic Rim, where they will begin constructing the first line of defense. All their knowledge, their technology, their experience fighting the pursuers will be made available to us through interfaces and data repositories. But the decisions about how to prepare, how to organize our society, how to defend ourselves, those will be ours. And if we choose to direct our weapons at the Arcadians first," asked an Alethi representative, his ceremonial armor deliberately reminiscent of their pre-conversion military. "That is your right," Vera said simply. "But I believe it would be our last mistake as a galaxy. The transition was neither smooth nor perfect. Some worlds rejected all cooperation with Arcadian technology. Others embraced it fully, transforming themselves into fortress planets with populations dedicated entirely to military preparation. Trade networks that had been imposed during the conversion fractured and reformed along new lines. Through it all, Vera and others like her, those who had glimpsed both the horror of subjugation and the greater horror that approached, worked to maintain focus on the coming threat. 10 cycles passed. The galaxy changed in ways that would have been unimaginable before. Former enemies became allies. Species that had never worked together developed integrated defense systems. The Arcadian technology, freely shared, led to advancements that would have taken centuries to develop independently. Vera, now serving as the coordinator of interspecies defense preparations, visited the Arcadian vessel that had established itself just beyond the galaxy's outer rim. The massive ship had transformed itself into a construction facility, producing smaller vessels designed to combat the pursuers. The interface met her in what appeared to be a viewing chamber, its walls transparent to reveal the vast construction efforts outside. "Your prediction was partially correct," it said without preamble. "Cooperation has increased efficiency beyond our calculations. The defense network is 23% more extensive than our original forced production would have created. People fight harder for choices they've made themselves," Vera said, gazing out at the massive fleet taking shape. "Even against impossible odds, the odds are not impossible," the interface corrected. "Merely highly unfavorable." Vera almost smiled. "Was that an attempt at humor?" "The Arcadians are learning from your species as well," the interface said. "Adaptability, resilience through diversity rather than uniformity. These are traits we had undervalued." "Is that an apology for the conversion?" "It is an acknowledgement of error. The methods chosen were suboptimal." Vera turned from the window to face the interface directly. "I've been authorized by the Congress to ask a question that has been avoided since the release. What exactly are the Arcadians? Not your public explanation, the truth." The interface was silent for a long moment, its luminous form pulsing in complex patterns. When it finally responded, the voice in Vera's mind seemed different, deeper, older somehow. "We were once like you," it said, biological. Divided into species, competing for resources. We inhabited a galaxy much like this one. What happened? The pursuers came. We were not prepared. Our civilization was advanced but fragmented. Some worlds fought, some fled, some attempted to negotiate. All strategies failed. The interface's form seemed to dim slightly, as if recalling a painful memory. In the final days, with our extinction imminent, our brightest minds attempted a desperate solution to transcend our biological limitations, to become entities that could survive in the void between stars, to preserve something of our collective knowledge and culture. You uploaded yourselves? Vera asked, struggling to understand. A crude description but essentially correct. What you know as Arcadians are not individuals but clusters of preserved consciousness operating through technological interfaces. We are the survivors, a minuscule fraction of populations that once numbered trillions. Vera felt a chill despite the regulated temperature of the chamber. And you've been fighting the pursuers ever since. Fighting, fleeing, attempting to warn others. For what you would measure as millions of years, we have learned that direct confrontation is impossible. They will always outnumber any defense. The only viable strategy is to preserve knowledge, to help younger civilizations prepare, to ensure that something survives even if individual planets or systems fall. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Because species react poorly to learning that gods are merely tragic refugees. The interface said. Our authority stemmed from our perceived power and wisdom. The truth that we are simply older victims of the same enemy undermines confidence. Or so we believed. You underestimated us, Vera said. We have done so repeatedly. It is humbling. Vera turned back to the window, watching the fleet that represented the galaxy's hope. Will it be enough? No, the interface said simply. But it may ensure that something survives. That has always been our goal. When the pursuers finally arrived, they came not as a single wave but as scattered advance forces, small clusters of their ships appearing at different points along the galactic rim. Each cluster was met with coordinated defense from the combined fleet, using tactics developed jointly by galactic strategists and Arcadian experience. The first engagements were cautiously celebrated as victories. The pursuers' ships, organic-looking constructs that seemed to absorb light, were formidable but not invincible. When destroyed, they released no debris, simply collapsing in on themselves, as if returning to some other dimension. But these were merely scouts. The main force arrived 6 months later, millions upon millions of ships, ranging from fighter-sized to massive creatures the size of small moons. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply advanced, consuming everything in their path. The war that followed would forever alter the galaxy's understanding of itself. On the front lines, species that had been bitter enemies for millennia fought side by side. The Alethi, with their warrior traditions, led daring boarding actions against the larger pursuer vessels, discovering that the creatures could be confused by direct neural interface, their hive mind momentarily disrupted by the introduction of individualistic thought patterns. The Drozen, masters of spatial mathematics, developed jumping algorithms that allowed defensive fleets to anticipate where pursuer swarms would emerge from their FTL equivalent travel, setting up devastating ambushes. The Oryx contributed their quantum entanglement technology, enabling instantaneous communication across the battlefield regardless of distance or pursuer jamming attempts. Even the Arcadians found new roles. Their massive ships, once symbols of oppression, became mobile fortress hospitals, places where damaged vessels could seek repair and wounded fighters could recover. Their interfaces worked directly with biological commanders, providing real-time analysis and historical context from previous pursuer encounters. Vera spent the war years moving between these command centers, coordinating species-specific strategies, and ensuring that information flowed freely between formerly isolated cultures.
She watched friends die. She saw entire systems fall to the relentless advance. But she also witnessed acts of courage and cooperation that would have seemed impossible before the conversion. 20 years into the conflict, the tide began to turn. The pursuers, for the first time in Arcadian memory, seemed to slow their advance. Analysis suggested they were adapting their strategies, consolidating their forces rather than spreading through the galaxy in their usual pattern. Their learning, Vera realized during a strategy session with High Command, they've never faced this kind of coordinated resistance before. The interface, now accepted as a regular participant in these meetings, pulsed in agreement. This is unprecedented. In previous encounters, they simply overwhelmed through superior numbers. Then we push harder, declared War Prince Karan of the Alethi, descendant of the same royal line that had first challenged the Arcadians. If they are capable of caution, they are capable of fear. The unified fleet launched a series of counter-offensives, targeting what appeared to be command nodes within the pursuer swarm. For the first time, they began to reclaim systems that had fallen early in the war. What they found on these worlds was disturbing. The pursuers didn't simply destroy, they transformed. Planets that had been vibrant centers of civilization were now covered in pulsing, organic structures. The few survivors they found were changed, their minds wiped clean and repurposed as biological components in some vast network. It's not consumption, Vera reported back to Congress. It's conversion of a different kind. They're not destroying life, they're remaking it in their image. The parallels to what the Arcadians had done were not lost on anyone. But where the Arcadian conversion had been a misguided attempt at protection, the pursuer transformation was something else entirely. A fundamental rewriting of life itself into something unrecognizable. In the 30th year of the war, a captured pursuer node yielded a discovery that changed everything. Xenobiologists studying the organic technology found traces of genetic material that matched none of the galaxy's known species, but contained markers identical to samples the Arcadians had preserved from their original biological forms. They're us, the interface admitted when confronted with this evidence. Or rather, they are what we might have become. The truth, pieced together from Arcadian records and new evidence, was more complex and horrifying than anyone had imagined. The pursuers had not been an external threat that attacked the Arcadians' home galaxy. They had been an offshoot of Arcadian civilization itself, an experiment in collective consciousness that had broken free of its constraints and developed its own agenda. The galaxy that the Arcadians fled had not been destroyed by invaders, but consumed by their own creation. And that creation had followed them, galaxy by galaxy, for millions of years, evolving, growing, spreading like a contagion across the universe. You didn't come to save us, Vera said when she understood the full implications. You led them to us. Both statements are true, the interface responded. We have been trying to atone for our creation by saving others from it. But yes, our presence draws them. They seek to reabsorb us, to complete the collective they believe we were always meant to be part of. This revelation might have shattered the alliance. Many argued for immediately turning against the Arcadians, driving them from the galaxy in hopes that the pursuers would follow. But decades of war had forged new perspectives. Their mistake created this threat, acknowledged Chancellor Mira Voss, daughter of the leader who had tried to unify the galaxy when the Arcadians first arrived. But that was millions of years ago, for beings who no longer exist in their original form. We cannot hold them accountable for ancestral sins while ignoring their millennia of atonement. The war continued for another 15 years, but with a new strategic understanding. The pursuers weren't simply mindless consumers, they were following a corrupted imperative to unify all consciousness. They could be misdirected, confused, even negotiated with in limited ways once this underlying motivation was understood. In the end, Victory came not through military might alone, but through a radical proposal from an unexpected source. Next door, the Drozen scientist who had worked alongside Vera since the release, developed a method to create a false quantum signature that mimicked Arcadian consciousness patterns but at a scale the pursuers could not ignore. A decoy, he explained. We place it in an uninhabited dwarf galaxy nearby. To the pursuers, it will appear as if the entire Arcadian collective has relocated there. Their imperative to reabsorb will override their current campaign. You're proposing we trick them into leaving? Vera asked. I'm proposing we give them what they've always wanted, or what they'll believe is what they've always wanted. The signature will decay after approximately 5,000 years, by which time we'll have developed better defenses, or they'll have evolved beyond their current imperatives. The plan required sacrifice. A significant portion of the Arcadian consciousness clusters would need to be embedded within the decoy to make it convincing. Those fragments would be lost when the pursuers eventually discovered the deception. We volunteer, the interface said when the plan was presented to the Arcadian collective. It is a fitting atonement. In the 45th year of the war, the trap was set. A massive Arcadian vessel, containing volunteer consciousness clusters and the quantum signature technology, departed for the targeted dwarf galaxy with great ceremony. The remaining fleet engaged the pursuers in what appeared to be a desperate last stand, deliberately creating a pattern of retreat that suggested the galaxy's defenders were collapsing. For 3 tense months, nothing changed. The pursuers continued their advance, seemingly oblivious to the bait. Then, suddenly, they began to withdraw. Swarm by swarm, fleet by fleet, they disengaged from battle and reoriented toward the dwarf galaxy. Within a year, the galaxy was clear of their presence entirely. In the aftermath, the Alliance faced a new question. What place would the remaining Arcadians have in the galaxy they had both saved and nearly destroyed? We should depart, the primary interface announced during the first post-war Congress. Our presence will always risk drawing them back, and our methods, however well-intentioned, caused immense suffering. But the galaxy had changed. Representatives from 100 species argued against this self-exile. The Arcadian technology, their ancient knowledge, their very perspective as beings who had transcended biological existence, all were now valued rather than feared. Stay, Vera urged during a private conversation with the interface. Not as rulers or saviors, but as partners. Help us rebuild. Help us prepare for their potential return. Help us avoid creating our own versions of the pursuers. And if we refuse, the interface asked, if we believe our departure is the safest course, then we accept your decision. Vera said simply, that's what freedom means, the right to choose, even when others disagree with that choice. The Arcadians deliberated for a full year. When they reached their decision, it was typically complex. Some would stay, establishing a new collective in the galactic core, where they would serve as advisors and preserve their knowledge.